Hello Year 8, it's lovely to speak to you all and to help you continue your learning in your Victorian Voices module. The lesson I've decided to do with you today looks at one of my favourite writers, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. You may have come across his work as he famously wrote the Sherlock Holmes detective novels. Specifically, we're going to be looking at extracts from his novel The Sign of the Four, and more specifically, the presentation of foreigners through that. So make sure you have a pen and paper and you have your title written down and underlined with a ruler, and we'll get started. As with all of your lessons, we'll start with a quick quiz, just reminding you how to use certain types of punctuation. Don't worry if you're unsure, just give it a go. If you pause the recording now to answer those. Okay, now you should have the answers in front of you. Mark your work now, and if you did make any mistakes, just correct them and don't worry. So, number 1. In what two instances should you use a semicolon? Now you should use one to either link two independent clauses that are closely related to each other, or in a list if there are any items that contain commas within them. Now, number 2, what is a subordinate clause? A subordinate clause is a clause that is dependent on the main clause. A subordinate clause does not make sense on its own. Number 3, put the commas in the correct place in the following sentences. So the first one, because my coffee was too cold, then we need the comma there, and then it's I heated it in the microwave. This is because I heated it in the microwave is a main clause. Because my coffee was too cold is the subordinate clause. Therefore, you need a comma separating them. The second one, although he was wealthy, comma, he was still unhappy. The reason we've got there is, again, we're starting with the subordinate clause followed by a main clause, and they need to be separated with a comma. Third one, whenever prices go up, customers buy less products. And again, starting with a subordinate clause and then followed by a main clause, so that comma will go between up and customers. Number 4, now that he's rich and famous, people make allowances for his idiosyncrasies. So in between there, we've got it between famous and people. And the final one's a little bit trickier because you actually need two commas in there. So we've got since winter is coming, comma, I think I'll knit a warm sweater, comma, because I'm always cold. Now the main clause is in the middle there, and it is surrounded by two subordinate clauses, giving us some extra information. Okay, now that we've done our quiz and we've got our title, and before we have a look at the extracts from Conan Doyle's novel, I just wanted to give you some information about the British Empire in the Victorian era. This information could give us an insight into how, or indeed why, they viewed foreigners in a certain way. You can make any notes that you'd like on your piece of paper as we go through. If you do want to pause it after I've read through it, feel free to, so you can get some information down. This information here is going to help us later on. So the British Empire in the Victorian era. The British Empire was the greatest empire in the world has ever seen, and for more than a century Britain was the foremost global power. Now there were other empires at the time, but they just weren't as big as ours, and they weren't really in any sort of competition. Now the years 1815 to 1914 are referred to as Britain's imperial century, and that is during the Victorian era. At this time, the empire included over 14 million square miles of territory and 450 million people. So you can imagine how big that is. It included more than a quarter of the world's population, and it was said that the sun never set on the British Empire, a phrase which was attributed to a Scottish writer, John Wilson. Now, with supremacy at sea with our navy, Britain took on the role of a global policeman, sometimes called the Pax Britannica. And as well as having formal control over its own colonies, with a dominant position in the world trade, Britain could effectively control the economies of many countries, including China, Argentina and Siam. And Siam is modern-day Thailand. Now, the empire was vital for trade, and during the reign of Queen Victoria, at the height of the British Empire, British ports were full of ships arriving from far and wide, carrying the goods that were processed and sold, making Britain a very wealthy nation. They even had a great exhibition in 1851, which was the world's first fair, was a celebration of the diversity and the richness of the empire. Okay, let's have a look at our first extract. Now, this extract describes a room in a house of the character Thaddeus Sholto. The character's father was in the army of the British Empire, and therefore in the room we see lots of examples of what would be seen as foreign and exotic to the eyes of the Victorian reader. I'm going to read through this description. While I read through it, I really want you to think for yourself how you feel foreigners is presented here. The extract is from the point of view of John Watson. We were all astonished by the appearance of the apartment into which he invited us. In that sorry house that looked as out of place as a diamond of the first water in a setting of brass. The richest and glossiest of curtains and tapestries draped the walls, looped back here and there to expose some richly mounted painting or oriental vase. The carpet was of amber black, so soft and so thick that the foot sank pleasantly into it, as into a bed of moss. 2 great tiger skins thrown athwart it increased the suggestion of Eastern luxury, as did a huge hookah which stood upon a mat in the corner. A lamp in the fashion of a silver dove was hung from an almost invisible golden wire in the centre of the room. As it burned, it filled the air with a subtle and aromatic odour. Now that we've read through this description, we're going to zoom in on a particular quote. I want you to write this quote on your paper. Circle or underline any keywords or techniques. And of those keywords and phrases, write down any connotations or ideas that you get from them. Pause the video now to do this. I've also had a look at this quote, and this is what I picked out when I looked at it. Now, as I go through what I've written, make sure you add to your own. But don't cross anything you've got out, because all of your thoughts are valid too. So, firstly, we've got so soft and so thick. Conan Doyle here has repeated the intensifier so to emphasise the luxuriousness of the materials, especially with the connotations of those of soft and thick, which makes us think of something rich and comfortable. Now, this is also used with the adverb pleasantly, giving connotations of warmth and comfort as well with it. Now, finally, he's finished off with a simile, as into a bed of moss. This again emphasises the softness of the carpet. However, perhaps the use of moss is also suggesting something primitive about it. With moss being something from the natural world, is he suggesting it's not quite as civilised, that it's almost like an outside, an other? Make sure you've got those notes down on yours as well. If you need to pause the video, feel free to. Now that we've got your notes there, I want you also to think about why is he actually presented the objects this way? Think about what we learned at the start, those contextual factors, the idea of trade, the idea of the wealth that came from the empire. Are they presented so opulently because it is associated in the Victorian mind with wealth, with richness? Now we come to our second extract from the novel. This extract conveys how the people of the Victorian era viewed different races in the empire. I'm going to read through it. It is quite a shocking description because clearly they didn't have the same views that we have now about different races. Okay, so the Aborigines of the Andaman Islands may perhaps claim the distinction of being the smallest race upon this earth, though some anthropologists prefer the Bushmen of Africa, the Digger Indians of America, and the Terra del Fuegians. The average height is rather below 4 feet, although many full-grown adults may be found who are very much smaller than this. They're a fierce, morose and intractable people, though capable of forming most devout friendships when their confidence has once been gained. Mark that, Watson. Now then, listen to this. They are naturally hideous, having large misshapen heads, small, fierce eyes and distorted features. Their feet and hands, however, are remarkably small. So intractable and fierce are they that all the efforts of the British official have failed to win them over in any degree. They have always been a terror to shipwrecked crews, braining the survivors with their stone-headed clubs or shooting them with their cannibal poisoned arrows. These massacres are invariably concluded by a cannibal feast. So this is a description given in the Sign of the Four to describe the people from the Andaman Islands. Does anything surprise you about this description? How do you think a modern reader is going to respond to this? What I'd like you to do is answer those two questions on your paper. Pause the video now to do that. As with the last extract, we are now going to zoom in on a quote from the description. Again, I want you to pick out keywords and phrases and write down any connotations or ideas you get from them. Pause now to do this. So this is what I got. Obviously the description for a modern reader is quite shocking, as it is very racist, and we can see this through many of the words I've picked out here. Add to your own again as I go through it, but remember, your ideas are just as valid, so keep them as well. So first of all, we've got that idea of naturally hideous. So the word naturally suggests there's something primitive or wrong with how they are formed, and then the word hideous having connotations of deformed or shockingly ugly. This, coupled with the fact that he's used misshapen, again giving the idea of something abnormal and wrong. The adjective fierce here suggests that not only are they perhaps a wrongness, but they also are innately violent and savage. And again, he's used the word distorted, which further compounds the fact they're seen as deformed and abnormal. So again, why do you think Conan Doyle has described this race as this? Clearly it's something that we wouldn't be doing nowadays. It's something that we don't believe nowadays. So why then did the Victorian era have such shocking views on people of other races? Okay, so this is the final task that I want you to do today. And what we're going to be thinking about is that first question: how does Conan Doyle use language to present foreignness? Now, what I want you to do is write a full what, how, why paragraph. You just need to do it on one of those two quotes that we've looked at closely. I really want you to think about and have a go at that why challenge. It is harder, but with what we've looked at today, you should be able to answer it. Now, starting with the what, Conan Doyle used language to present foreignness as, and you can either talk about its opulence, the wealth, or you can think about that's the quote from the second extract, thinking about the fact that they're seen as something to fear. Make sure you use a quote in your paragraph. So you put that in, this is evident when it states. Use the full quote and use it from the exact words from the text. Now, when you get to your how, I do want you to try and pick out every single thing that we've discussed and any ideas that you had. So there is only one sentence on the page there, but you can add more. So you've got all of your ideas in there. Remember, your how should be the biggest part of your paragraph. Then you need to talk about the impact that it has on the reader. So this makes the reader feel, imagine, understand, or think. Now make sure you only use one of those 4 words, not all 4, so it can make the reader feel something or imagine something or understand something or think something. Not all 4 of them, or it won't make any sense. Now finally, that final challenge. Why? Conan Doyle does this because. Try and link in some of those contextual factors that we've been looking at. The idea of the trade, the idea of the wealth that came from it. Also, the idea that people weren't used to people from other races. They wouldn't have travelled, they wouldn't have seen the other races. They weren't used to the other cultures. They didn't live in the multicultural society that we do nowadays. Okay? So think of how shocking something of a different culture would be to someone of a Victorian era and why they might fear this. Pause the video now to answer that question. And write your paragraph. Okay, that's the end of the lesson. Well done, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you all stay safe, and I'll hopefully see you all again in September. Bye bye.